Yeah, so listen, I'm basically going to take you through some basic things. Today, we're talking about jumpstarting the new year, finding reasons and ways to start doing things differently to create a different result in our lives. So, the idea I came up with this was, most people want to start something last few weeks of December, but I started realizing jumpstarting it was really an important thing. Being able to start to get a better jump start on things was really important. And with this material, I always found it was really important to do that. Um, so the idea is I want you to kind of suspend disbelief at this point and, connect with the information. Um, what I'll do is I'll run you through how I got to where I am first, and then we'll start to talk about the information. Um, so my story starts back a good 33 years ago. I was a 26-year-old kid. I was fresh out of rehab. I had a 2-year-old daughter. I was in the middle of a divorce. And I realized I didn't want to be that dad. I didn't want to be, a non existent parent. And I decided then and there, at 26 years old, with basically nothing, that I wanted to be the best dad I could be. Now, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that's what I wanted. So at the time, I entered into a program which taught the steps and taught me some basic ideas about really what started to be the basis and foundation for all of what I've done for the last 33 years. And the first thing it taught me about was the things I could and can't control, and knowing the difference between those two things. And as a person trying to find themselves, to realize the difference between what you can control and what you can't control became a really important factor in me being able to develop self-control, develop self-discipline. But obviously I was young, 26 years old. The other thing it taught me very early on was a bit of gratitude. I was starting to become grateful for who I was or who I wanted to become. But at the time, that was my goal. My goal was just to be a great dad. I knew that I needed to do that. And I took those basic principles and I went to work and I started to learn those things about hard work. I started to had a few skills. So I started to work with those skills to become, to provide. Um, Fast forward about 5 years after that, I realized that I needed to provide a family for this child. I didn't have a functional relationship. My ex-wife was not a functional relationship partner. So it was really important for me. And where I was in my life, I decided again, I made a decision. I was looking for somebody, but I was looking for somebody specific. So I decided, again, I made a decision that I wanted a woman who had kids. And now at the time, I was clean and sober. So I certainly wanted somebody who didn't drink or didn't do drugs. So I decided that's who I was looking for. And once I set my mind on that, sure, it wasn't very long after that, I found the absolute love of my life, my partner, my best friend, who's still with me 29 years later. And it became, back to those two major decisions I made in my life when I made that decision to become a great dad or the best dad I could be. And then I made a decision that I wanted to create a family, a healthy environment for my child to grow up in. And of course, that um, expanded to a couple other things. At the time, another goal or desire of mine was to become a police officer. Now, with my background, I knew there was a certain way that I had to do it, and I was going to do it honestly and with integrity. And I was able to do that. So I became a police officer on top of that. So this is 1995. So at that time, I'm working hard. I've got a couple jobs. I'm working as a police officer. I'm working a full-time business. Um, Started to acquire businesses because my business was great, but I just wanted to evolve to something more. And at that time, I started to acquire businesses. But a funny thing happened about 11 years after that. I ran into this movie called The Secret. Now, if you've never seen this movie, I suggest you see it. Basically, the idea of the movie is it's about the law of attraction. And this movie, I would have to say, was the single biggest pivot point in my personal growth life. Because at that point, I realized this single concept, which was the law of attraction, that if you start to think about the things that you really want, you can create those in your life. And I believed it. I understood it basically, but I realized I was doing that. I had already started to do those things. I just didn't even know really what it was. I knew that hard work, I knew that, persistence, and I knew something about goals, and I started to understand them. Again, I didn't know what they were, but at that point, I realized that was the deal. That was the change for me. I took that single concept, which was the law of attraction, which is actually a secondary law of the law of vibration, as there's many laws in the universe, but this one really got me, and I started to teach it to my kids. So everything I did really evolved around that. And as my kids grew up and they got older, I taught them how to use that single concept to create jobs, to create opportunities for themselves. Um, so it was really a big pivotal point in my life. And I had continued to use that single idea. Um, I eventually retired from the police department. I wound up buying and selling businesses, which was kind of the little area I had gotten into. But I really wasn't quite satisfied. I got it and I did it, but these businesses started to sour on me. I was not happy in what I was doing. My core mission wasn't there, and I decided that I needed to make a change. And so at that point, I sold the businesses I had, and kind of lost pretty much everything and had to start over again because I didn't like how I had set it up. So I started over again, started building back up one more time. But this time I kind of found that same person who was the main character or main protagonist in the movie The Secret. His name is Bob Proctor. He had put on a end of the year jumpstart to the new year 5-day workshop. And when I saw that, everything changed because I realized that that one concept I had been running around with to basically create this wonderful life where I've, attracted businesses, I've attracted a partner, I've attracted all these things, was just the tip of the iceberg for it. So what I did was I jumped in head first, and I spent the last 3 years studying every little bit of that whole concept and what it was about. Now, today I'm going to bring you 3 basic concepts. These are some ideas that will change your life. If you use them, they will definitely work for you. The nice thing about what I'm going to show you today is it's things that you, as I put it, you once you see them, you can't unsee them. Once you know them, you can't unknow them. So that's kind of how I look at that. So take some notes if you can. If you pad and pens, if you have any questions, hold them to the end. If we have some time, we'll take some questions. Let's see. I'm going to start up a little slide presentation for you. Let me get to. Now, the one thing we're talking about with this is the very first part of this. Share my screen here. 1 minute. All right. So what we're talking about here are 3 basic concepts, 3 simple things that you can jumpstart your new year on. The first one are goals and goal setting. We're going to learn about goals, and we're going to learn about goal types. There's a very orderly way to start to do that. And I'll reference back to what I did when, in the last 20 something years. And then we'll get into habits and behaviors and why we can do things. It's nice to set a goal, but it's to understand the habits and behaviors that allow us to let those goals go to fruition. And the last thing we'll touch on is getting into action, because all of this is wonderful. You can set a goal, you can create a habit, you can really move forward, but if you're not in action, you'll never get anywhere. So that's another thing we're going to talk about. So let's talk about goal types. As I talk about it, and as my mentor Bob Proctor talked about, there's 3 types of goals. The first goal is an A-type goal. This is a type of goal that we've achieved before. All right, we bought a car, so we're going to buy another car. We've acquired a job type, and we're going to get a different job type. So those are things that we know how to do. That's an A-type goal. We can do it. We know how to achieve it. It's already been done before. There's no real upward movement with that. The idea that I'll tell you real quickly, the idea of a goal is to grow, right? We get things from goals, but the real idea of a goal is to grow. So the second type of goal that we talk about is a B type goal. Now, these are goals that you probably can get. You may not have done them before, but if something comes through or something falls into place, or somebody does something for you, or this money comes through, you can make that happen. Basically, things are outside of your control that you're relying on. The problem with those goals, they're great if things fall into place. But the problem is when things get tough and things get hard, we don't have that motivation to continue, and we lose it. And if the first path of least resistance, the first resistance we get, we're going to stop and we're not going to go forward towards our goal. But the one we really want, the one that you need to understand that makes everything happen, is what we call a C-type goal. C-type goal is a goal that you've never done before. You have no idea how to do it. And the other part of it is that it excites you and scares the crap out of you all at the same time. Now, the beautiful part about that is it puts into motion some things in your head. The idea with that is it's hard to look at something like, I have no idea how to do it. That's kind of the scary part. But the beautiful part about those goals is you don't have to know. Because once you get into the mindset of achieving that, once you get to that point where you've made a committed decision, things, people, places, circumstances show up to make those things happen. So how do we find those goals? How do we go about achieving that C-type goal? Well, one of the things we do, I always like this quote. Thomas Edison said, if we did all the things that we were capable of, we'd literally astound ourselves. Thomas Edison could tell you, from his point of view about setting goals. That he set a goal. He decided he wanted to not rely on gas lamps. Well, he decided that he was going to do that and failed 10,000 times before he finally created the incandescent bulb. But he had a goal, he had a vision, he made a committed decision to do that. So I go by saying, what is your purpose? What are you looking for? What I like to ask people, and I like you to ask yourself, is what do you really want? What are the things that drive you? What are the things that excite you? We're going to use something for that I'm going to ask you to look at, is your imagination. It's something we'll talk about. It's one of our higher faculties that we'll get into shortly. But, as adults, we've been so conditioned away from being able to imagine and use our imagination. We're so limited by, our surroundings. We're limited. So I tell people, okay, well, what do you want? And the answer will be, well, I don't really know. And most of the time you don't. Most people don't. And then I ask a little bit deeper and I'll say, if time, money, and circumstances weren't an issue, what would you want? What do you want? So when you start to use your imagination, the idea of this exercise is to write down the things that you want and make it a shopping list. You just decide. The problem is that we get very limited on how we think. We tend to set a goal, setting a goal to achieve something that is so big, that's so exhilarating, like I said, that excites you and scares you all at the same time. Now, you don't have to know how to do it. That's the beautiful part. You just have to know that you can. That's the important part. So the questions you ask yourself when you find that goal is, can I do it? And, am I willing and am I able? Two things that you can ask yourself. Now, when you decide what you want, I always tell people, just write it down. Take a piece of paper, write it down. Write down what you want. Think about the things without limitation. The problem is that we get into limitations, whether it's our thoughts, whether it's our actions, whether it's our own self-image. We're not talking about this today, but we'll go over it at some time, and I'll post a link that we can do a Calendly link to get into a little bit more depth about that if you choose. But how we look at ourselves and our self-image, I tell people you can't outperform your self-image. So there's only so far you can go with that. So you write it down. You start making a list. I like to say it's like a shopping list of things you want. And it doesn't have to be logical. It just has to be something you really, really want. Now, the other part of it is that you can't change your life permanently until you change your paradigm. Now, what's a paradigm? A paradigm is basically, the paradigm is a multitude of habits that create a mental program that has almost exclusive control over our habitual behavior. And almost all our behavior is habitual. Now, what does that mean? The example I like to use is the autonomic things we do. We breathe, we walk. The things that we do are just automatic. Those type of things are just programs that run. You ever drive down the highway and next thing you know, you realize you missed your exit? Because that automatic programming kicks in. That's kind of what it is. The trick is to understand that it controls everything. That paradigm, that multitude of habits controls your use of time, your perception, which is also another one of our higher faculties, creativity, your effectiveness, your productivity, and our logic. So it's really important to understand that that's a really important part of it. But most people don't understand what it is or where it is. And that's kind of what we'll get into now. The idea with paradigm that it's located in our subconscious mind. Now, I tell people, I start talking about the mind. Now, I want to explain that what we do is we think in pictures. So if I ask you to think of your front door, you can close your mind, your eyes, or you can even leave your eyes open, and you can picture your front door. If I ask you picture your house, the color of your house, you could probably do that. I'd ask you picture your car. You can picture your car. You can picture how many doors it has, what color it is. But when I ask you to picture your mind, most people will come up with a picture of your brain. And that is no more your mind than your finger is your mind. So in 1930s, there was a doctor. He was a doctor of healing arts. His name was Thurman Fleet. And he realized he wasn't helping people in getting them to understand how to fix and heal themselves because he couldn't come up with an idea or a picture of the mind. And he came up with this picture of the mind. And we use it and we call it, actually, now we affectionately call it, the stick figure. So this is what he came up with, which is picture of mind. A circle on the top and a circle on the bottom with a line. And then on the top circle, we put a straight line through and talked about your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. So we can start to get a picture of what that looks like. Now, our conscious mind we know of is our thinking mind. This is where we're able to take things in. We're able to take things in our surroundings and accept or reject that idea. And your subconscious mind is your emotional mind. Now, in that emotional mind, that's where our paradigm lives. Now, the part of the subconscious mind is it doesn't know what's real and what's not real. It's only what's become accepted by you. Now, a couple of other concepts here is that we're all about energy. We know that energy is everywhere, that everything is energy. You know that we create energy. We know that we are energy. You know, when you're around somebody who has a high energy, you can feel it. So these are measurable things. So the idea about energy is we can then direct that energy to and through us from the conscious mind to the subconscious mind and out through the body. And how that works is by using and accepting certain ideas. Most people are on automatic pilot. They're like a ship without a rudder. They're controlled by their outside influences. So what I want to do is to explain a little bit more detail about that right now. So if we look at the mind, we look at where our thoughts are in our mind here. We live basically through our five senses, our hearing, our see, smell, touch, and taste. Now, this is our thinking mind. Here we can accept or reject or even originate an idea. Now, this is also a place where we have what we call our intellectual faculties. I also like to call them our higher faculties. And when I'm speaking with people to understand, it really is our superpowers. I mean, these are the 6 faculties that we use that come from within us that are in no other animal in the animal kingdom that have been our God-given abilities. They are imagination, which we talked about, intuition, reason, will, memory, perception. And these are all things that we can control. The things that come from the outside and the wonderful information highway that flows through us every day, we can't really control those things. But what we can do is we can accept or reject those ideas. The idea behind that is and the information is impressed and repeated in your mind, it becomes part of your conscious and your subconscious and your feeling mind. And once it gets into your emotional mind, that's where feelings are. That's where anything that's accepted down there and must be accepted, because it doesn't know whether it's real or not. So as we start to understand the things that we want, they're down into the subconscious mind. And from there, it controls the vibration of that energy that we talked about, which comes out through the body with the things that we do, the vibrations that we give, and the energy that comes out there. Now, all of this creates the things that we look for. So when we go back to the important part of talking about goals, and we talk about using our imagination, we really can come from within ourselves to do that. Now, the idea of all of this is really start to learn to control those emotions, to not allow those things to go down to our subconscious mind where they become habitual behaviors and become a paradigm that we can't necessarily think differently from. The limitations that we have, all the little limitations, come from those paradigms that we've instilled, that are, some are from when we were born, some are hereditary, some are, from what we've lived through and conditions that we've got in our lives. But again, those limitations then don't allow you to express or accept certain things. So we go back to goal setting. We talk about how those goals are internalized, how we can accept those. So the idea was to get out of that limitation and get into the intellectual faculties, those 6 higher faculties that allow us to really start to change the things that become present in our subconscious mind. But we have the control to do that. That's the beauty of all of this. So when we understand that and we learn to control that information and we express that through our body, the beauty of that information and what happens is, at that point, things start to change in our lives. Things start to come. The beautiful serendipities of being in the vibration of what you want start to show up. Somebody shows up in your life. You get a phone call for something. Things fall into place, like in my situation for businesses. I'll get you back to when I was, made a decision. I made a decision to be, I wanted to be a really great dad for my kids. And that's all I ever wanted to do at that time. And the situation started to create in my life where I eventually attracted this amazing partner who we then created this huge functionally, family, which we expanded to now having 6 kids and 2 grandkids with. But again, I look back on all those things, and I look back to the achievements I made because I made that committed decision. I knew I wanted to become a police officer, but I really didn't really know how. I had an idea, but I had to act on those ideas. Same thing when I made a decision that I wanted to own and buy businesses. And the same thing happened. I made that committed decision and I acted upon that. I didn't really know how, but the places and circumstances came to me. A lot of times I was ready to buy a business. I had no idea how I was going to find the funding or how it was going to work out. But every time, everything I needed at the time I needed it showed up, because I made that C-type goal decision and I stayed committed to that action. And I used those, I kept thinking about it. I kept understanding it. I kept picturing it in my mind. I would write down those goals. And today that's kind of what I do, the same thing. I made this next committed decision in my life to do this. I just wanted to teach this material. I wanted to show people how this material can change their lives. So I made my next committed decision was to do this. And that's what I do now, is I do the coaching and the mentoring. I do it for businesses and I do it for individuals as well. So the we were talking about, so we understand that how that works. Now we understand how the mind works. We can then see how these things work and we can start to take control of those things. Okay, so goal achieving activities. That's what we need to talk about next. One of the things I teach, when you understand the goal that you want, you got to get into action. So the first thing I teach people is to write out every night before you go to bed the 6 things you need to do the next day. There was a guy named Ivy Lee that created this program back in the 20s. So this is It's a very good concept that was taught for many, many years, about 100 years now. And it's very simple and it works very effectively. So the night before, we write out all the things we need to do the next day in order of tasks that we need to get them done to accomplish. And then as we go that next day, we complete each task one by one to either its fullest completion, till we move on to the next one, or we can't continue any further and we've exhausted every possibility to complete it. And then that particular task will go on the next day's activity list. And then we move on to the next. So again, if you can't complete it, you go as far as you can that day and move it to the next day's process. So the idea is you just keep going every day. And if you make you start to get that part of your habit and you repeat that process every day, you'll make tremendous strides towards where you want to go. It's probably the single biggest factor in my success is being able to have that. I've made up these. Let me just pull that next screen up for you. I made these sheets up, and I can get you some if you want them. So I write this out every morning. I take one of these slips and I write out my 6 things. And it doesn't have to be 6 things. Some days it's 1 thing. Some days it's 3 things. But I always try to make a list of as many things that I need to do, and I sign it, and I hold myself accountable to that. So back to what we talked about, our higher faculties. Your perception is everything. If we take that goal and we make that perception and we look at it as we're going to achieve that, the perception creates that reality. Also, the same converse goes. I could tell you countless of people I know that said, oh, no matter what I do, nothing ever works out for me, because their perception is no matter what they do, nothing's going to work out. So when you start to become aware of the faculties that we have to see things and control things, and most importantly, start to control our emotions and know that that's where everything lies. So again, the goals create the direction and they give us the way to grow. And then we start to take action, but understanding that we have the control. So the idea with those 6 higher faculties is coming from the inside out. So I tell people we work from the inside out. So when you set these 6 goals up, and again, you work through them each one at a time. So the most important part is to be in action every day. That is the most important thing. And it doesn't have to be a large part. It just has to be a little every day. 1% every day creates a tremendous amount of momentum in just a simple year. And the last thing we talk about is mindset, success mindset versus survival mindset. This kind of puts together what we were talking about. Do you see yourself successful and financially free? Or do I see myself with a job that pays bills and a little extra? Rather than following the crowd, I follow the quiet voice inside that speaks the feelings rather than words. That's that intuition. That's one of our higher faculties, that gut feeling we get. I think so many people don't understand and misuse it. But there's how I explain that is there's a couple voices in our head. That voice that tells you, you can't do this. Maybe next time. Maybe, I'll stay in bed a little longer. That voice is not your intuition. That little voice inside of you that never steers you wrong, that always comes through for you, is that gut feeling when you said, yeah, I should go left instead of right. That voice will never, ever steer you wrong. So to understand those differences between the two and start to see which is which, you start to understand that voice that doubts, that voice that challenges those things that you think about. That is not your intuition. That's that little voice in your head that's telling you that limiting beliefs, those limiting thoughts that sometimes come from self-image and other things. But really follow that inner voice, that inner thing, and don't live your life with the norms and what you've been told about, because that comes from the outside in. We don't want to live that way because it's easy for people to criticize. It's easy for people to not see your vision. When you create that C-type goal and you share it with somebody, they may think you're nuts. Because if you're doing one specific task and you're successful at it, but that maybe you want to change gears and have a completely separate profession you want to do, people are going to think you're nuts. So the idea is not to listen to that outside noise. Again, coming from those inside those higher faculties is really important. And the other part is looking at obstacles as opportunities, that, and looking for the good in every situation. I've learned that, and it's an acquired skill. But once you understand that there's opportunity in everything, I like to say that when everything happens, there's always this and something better. We can look at things in a very neutral way. I think that information that comes at us um, has two sides to it. There's a positive and negative to everything. And I think that people tend to gravitate towards the negative side instead of the positive side, but they both exist. I mean, you could see both. The choice you need to make and that conscious decision you make, which I like to come from that inside out, is I make the conscious decision to look for that good, to find that opportunity in that obstacle. When things don't work out quite as planned, I realized, okay, got to be something else. And I always seem to follow it. It always seems to find itself. And that's where those opportunities and those serendipities come in play. When you keep falling or failing and getting blocked and you don't get what you want and you feel like you have to force it, that's your survival mindset. So when you understand the two differences, you can kind of go back to saying, okay, I'm looking for opportunities. I don't want to be in that negative side, and having your thoughts focused on what you want. And that's part of staying with that C-type goal, because once you get that C-type goal and you understand it comes from that place that really excites you, you create energy, you create excitement, and you will go over, around, under, and through any obstacle to get it. And that's the idea of it. So you always stay focused on what you want. And then, the survival mentality is that thoughts are, focused on your current circumstances. I think the problem is people focus on their current circumstances, and your current circumstances are partly from your past and your past thinking and your past emotions. So when you start to think differently, you create different results for yourself. So when you start to understand that makes a big difference. Okay. So and any other thing is just thinking of ways that you can do things. Most people find excuses. Most people find a reason not to do things and think of all the reasons why they can't think things. But successful people and success mindsets believe, really importantly, in that concept, deciding to find excuses for the things that you really want out of life. So the idea is, look, it's a very basic concept. These are very scratching the surface of the things that I really started to get into. But to give you an idea, just of what you can do and how you can change certain things. Like I said, I think it's more that you can't unknow it or unsee it once you do it, and let it think and let it start with that goal. I think that most people can start in that spot and then get into action. And I think, certainly for you, Pat, you can understand what it's like to do that because you've been there. You understand how it is to try to change direction, or, you teach that with your profession. You're teaching people about discipline. You're teaching them about how to create that consistency, create that change in their lives. And I think a lot of it has to do with that goal setting, and the goal is just not big enough. And I think part of what you do and I can do is teaching people to challenge that, to make them think bigger, to have them find those things and nurture them in their path to finding more, but understanding that it really is within their control. And I think that understanding how to control that thinking is such an important part of it that gets so overlooked because, oh man, there's so much information out there and you could just get lost in a sea of it. And I think you can understand that too. But that's pretty much it for what I got today. If you got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Let's see, I can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. There you go.
So my big takeaways were, for starters, the C-type goal. I like that you give people permission to go after a goal that not only excites them, but scares them as well. Because those are the goals that are ultimately going to really change your fucking life for the better and make you proud of what you've done. What was the B type goal? I remember what the A type goal was, but what's the B?
So the B-type goal is a goal that you think you could achieve if certain things happen or certain things fall into place, or if this money comes through or this person comes through. It's typically a goal that you think you can do. You may not have done it before, but it, there's a path that you see that it could work, but a lot of that path is out of your control. So you're not you,
So
you
there's a little
know
bit
some
of
of the
doubt
how
tied.
of it. That's the part of it that becomes a B type, is you kind of know the how, but there's things that have to fall into place to make that work. So the difference between that and the C type goals, you have no, absolutely no idea how to do it. And that's what creates that excitement, and then the thing that scares the shit out of you all at the same time, because you really have no idea. And you get to that point where you're like, okay, this is what I want. And you're starting from that point. And that's where, the beautiful part about it is when you make that committed decision. That's that word I like to use. Make a committed decision. You know that, when you want people to commit to doing the program and doing things a certain way. That's the difference. And then giving them permission to use that imagination. I mean, our whole lives are just beat down about imagination. Shit, when we're in school, you're daydreaming. You're like, pay attention. Stop looking out the window, right? And as adults, we're like, you don't have to use your imagination. But truth be told, I've secretly used it my whole life. As a kid, we played baseball, and bottom of the night, that World Series, up at bat, ready to go, 3-2, 2 outs, ready to go. And I still do. I do it with all the things. I've done so many different things in my life because I used my imagination. That's what I wanted to do. I mean, I've done so many things that way, and I think I personally feel gifted because I was born with a persistence that I don't think was there. I mean, I've always had it since I was 8 years old. And that's a really important part of it, is that persistence to go through those things. But to have that persistence, you've got to have a goal that's worthy of that ideal, that really that drives you, because that goal can create um, energy, right? I mean, we talk about energy, and I was like, oh, I just don't have any energy. Well, you teach people how to exercise and create energy from strength and cardiovascular and getting your heart, but people can create that by just getting excited about their lives, right? I mean, people are on freaking autopilot all the time. And this kind of wakes them up. I like how you teach. I like how you use that in your in what you do. I think that you use it to a certain degree because you can hold people accountable. But there's a side of that where I like to help people, change their lives. I think this information works well for business owners. I think it works well for business owners that have employees because they can use this information. I've got programs that I can put them through 3-6 month programs that do, down and dirty of all of the things I talked about. We didn't even address the self-image. That's a whole nother area. But there's probably 12 different areas I can get into that these things I've learned, and I've become a student, a product of the product now because of what I've learned. And I study every day because it's fascinating. And I just, the repetition of the information is the key, not teaching people that to learn something, you need what we call constant space repetition. They're over and over again, you know, um, Bob Proctor used to sit with a book on a stand and read that same passage for 30 days. Like, who would do that, right? I read through a book and I'm like, okay, I'm done with the book, but I pick the book up again and I realize I read something different. And I read it again. I read something different. And I realize it's not that there's something different in that book, but there's something different in me because I'm seeing things a different way. And I can see the things that are in that book a different way. And then I internalize them and I understand them differently. So all of the things I teach are about that type of learning. And you can learn two ways: with the constant space repetition, or you can learn from a traumatic event. Something happens that just like an impact in your life that can change the trajectory of your life in an instant. And that also happens. That's not the greatest way to do it. But I've seen it happen in my own life with my kids. Um, so that's the kind of things I try to teach people to understand that it is within their control. And I have, probably a half a dozen clients of varying ages and sizes. And, I talked to one today. He's really in a tough spot and trying to get him to understand. And I say, look, do I have permission to speak with you freely? Because well, one, you're beating yourself up. And two, you're allowing your outside circumstances to control your situation. And people will fight you on it. They'll say, no, I'm not, but the beautiful part of where I'm at, I could see it from a different point of view. And that's why being a mentor or a coach, like, like you are, you could see things. You could see things with me that I'm not going to admit to myself, because you know that. And we'll have a conversation tomorrow about that. But the idea is it's the same concept. It's the same idea of teaching people things, that they are looking for. And again, it's not for everybody. What you have is not for everybody. What I have is not for everybody. I can't teach somebody who's not ready to understand these concepts. I can't mentor people that are stuck in their repetitive loop. And their paradigm is so stuck on the past of what harm has been done to them that they're just going to live their lives out in whatever meager existence or survival mode they're going to be in. I think everybody should have a piece of this in some form. I think kids should have that was one of the demographics I look to help, was these kids that need this help. I mean, my 6 kids are all between the age of 23 and 35. And it's tough to see them navigate through, and sometimes being stuck in jobs they hate, or spend 4 years in school to realize they can't make a living doing what it is they spent $120,000 on, So, but I appreciate you coming, man. It was nice to have somebody to talk to.
This is good, man.